So I decided against using a PowerPoint presentation because of our friend St. Thomas Aquinas here. Much more attractive than anything I could put up on a screen. Shown here is a young man, full head of hair, thin, extraordinary. So, and of course he was the man who inspired all these wonderful thinkers we're discussing at this conference. There's a routine that I saw on a YouTube video a few months ago. The title of it is "Everything is Amazing, but No One is Happy." And the gag has people on an airplane sitting on comfortable chairs and flying through the clouds on this sort of silver steel capsule. And they're all complaining, though. They're complaining because their wireless internet connection is too slow. It's an interesting observation. It's as if capitalism has made everything amazing, and yet everyone these days seems to hate capitalism. And let's leave aside the problem that it takes economic understanding to see cause and effect. There's a more general tendency to take whatever material goods surround us as something granted by fate, our own personal state of nature, a human right that is ours by grant of justice, and not for what it truly is, which is a historical contingency that came about through sweat and toil of generations that preceded us. The permanence of all the things that we inherit is just presumed. The goods are ours to redistribute by force if necessary. The services and tools they require belong to us, not to individuals, but to everyone, so they can be taxed at will. Nothing can harm them or reduce their number. This is a widespread tendency. I think about this often when I go into a big store like Walmart in the US, where everything is available and everything is practically free, it seems like. If anybody from a previous age, in the first millennium of Christianity or in the ancient world, had been placed into a Walmart today, they would just assume and ask, where are you? They'd answer something like, well, this must be heaven. I mean, this is paradise. How is this possible? But instead, everybody hates Walmart and wants to destroy it. We live in very strange times, new dark ages, maybe the first dark ages. I'm afraid that the same is true with publishing. Only for 500 years have books been copied by machines. After several millennia in which handwork was the only way to spread knowledge through the printed word. Only for 150 years have books been available to all classes of society. Every innovation in publishing has meant greater distribution at ever lower prices, culminating in today's print-on-demand methods and universal access unto infinity. This is what I would like to talk about in this today. As for digital methods, which have set the printed word free as never before, kids today ask their parents, my children ask me this, Dad, were you born before the internet? They're vaguely aware that there was life before the web, but they conglomerate it with the horse and buggy days and the days before running water. And there's something to this, actually. The advent of digital media has meant a complete revolution in publishing that makes the Gutenberg's movable type appear as a mere stage of progress. And yet, do we appreciate what this means for us? I don't think we do, not fully. And I worry that failing to appreciate this, liberals in the Misesian tradition will not fully comprehend what it means to push the literature of our tradition into digital form. And if we did understand this, we would be far more optimistic about the future, providing we believe in the power of ideas. So I'd like to take a step back and have a look at the role of digital media in the history of publishing generally. Looking at the sweep of publishing history, the goal of all innovation has always been the same. 3 parts: to lower the cost, to widen the distribution, and to permanentize the result. There were sometimes trade-offs between and among the goals. It was for this reason, for example, that the early scribes chose parchment over papyrus. The papyrus was much less expensive, but parchment was seen as more durable, and therefore the work would be preserved. A lesson we gain from reflecting on these choices and these 3 motivating forces is that there is no success for anyone who resists any kinds of innovation in publishing history. Let us begin with the work of the scribe. which is largely unchanged from the beginning of recorded history to the middle of the 15th century. The scribe in a monastery, in a convent, such as this very building, would work every day for up to 8 hours, breaking for psalm singing and for mass, and working with a variety of other specialists in graphics and ink, and working with whole teams to produce perhaps one book a year. When I prepared this talk, I hadn't expected that I would see some examples of their work here at this convent. Going up to the choir in the chapel over here, you went there, you saw there's space for more than 100 singers, and in the middle is this music stand that holds very large books, at about 3 feet tall and 2.5 feet wide each page. And there were 4 books, and they were the greatest treasures of this place. And you would have to sing from very far back, because you couldn't, it's unimaginable to us, but you couldn't have your own choir book. There could only be one, or at most, 4 in this case. Unbelievable. This is tremendous riches here. And you would have to read from far away. When I first saw it, I thought, well, they must have put the older monks older friars with failing eyesight, closer, and the younger novices would have to sing from 30 feet away or whatever. But then somebody corrected me, no, it'd be exactly the reverse. The older friars wouldn't, of course, need the books at all. They would have had it all memorized. I began to, as I stood there, I began to think about what they would sing. A lot of times they sang about economics, actually. And perhaps that's the connection between monastic life and the invention of economic science. I thought about this beautiful communion chant that they would sing. The text is simile est regnum celorum omni negotiatore quarenti bonus margaritas. And what it says is, well, let me sing it. You want me to hear? No, sing a few. Simile est regnum celorum omni negotiatori. That's the way it begins. And the text is, by the way, if there's any Gregorian chant specialists listening, yes, I know I missed a little bit of the rhythm on negotiatore. I don't have the music with me. That was by memory, in fact. The text is, listen to this. The text is, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant. Interesting. A merchant seeking pearls. And the story goes on to explain that this guy, he would buy low and he would sell high. That's the story. He eventually finds one of immense value. He sells everything, and he buys the pearl of great price. There's a story that Jesus told. And can you imagine what that must have sounded like in that time? And coming out of a world where the merchant was considered to be the lowest, lower than the slave. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant. Very interesting. Many, many songs the monks sang about economics. And to this point in history, it might have been easy to believe that the book and all that it represents fell within the economic classification of a scarce good, which is to say, by its nature, it cannot satisfy existing demand. It must be rationed by price, and it is radically finite, only duplicated with time and sweat. It might have been easy to conflate the work that went into making the book, the rarity of the ideas in the book, and the physical properties of the book with the message and the signs of the book itself. And in fact, these are really two different things. And all the progress in the future would work to delineate the difference between what is scarce by its nature, the paper, the binding, the time, versus what is potentially infinite, a non-finite good capable of duplication And those are the ideas and formulations in the book itself. And it was out of this institution of the scribe that the invention of the printing press came, not all at once, but over hundreds of years before movable type. They would use leather and wood cuts and a variety of other techniques. The innovations began with the monasteries, of course. But with commercial printing came the most remarkable thing of all, a phenomenon that took the book out of its scarce state altogether, another step towards its potential of being a completely non-scarce good. That phenomenon is known as the mechanized copy. We can understand this by example to the parable of the loaves and the fishes. An apostle attending a sermon by Jesus had brought only enough food for himself, and when the crowd became hungry, hey, we're going to get lunch around here? Jesus was able to copy this one lunch, infinitely, and feed the entire multitude. The Gospels are careful to add that there was enough left over at the end. That's what I mean by infinite copyability. And this is precisely what printing made possible. The work on the ideas and the preparation of the first manuscripts required time and labor on a scale few of us can even imagine today. But once the tools for printing were in place, an approximate copy of the original could be made, presuming even paper and machines. There was nothing that limited the number of copies that could be made. The text itself was a non-scarce thing. To realize the potential then became the dream of everyone with some idea to spread, whether it was philosophy, music, law, or theology. Movable type appeared with a Gutenberg Psalter in 1457. It was the first book, actually, that had a real date on it, even before the Gutenberg Bible. It seemed that the institution of the scribe would be no more, and monks all over Europe debated what to do. On the one hand, the religious communities had the strongest interest in printing advances, but on the other hand, their ways were very much bound up with the institution of the class of professional scribes, who, of course, opposed the advance and favored the retention of their services and the high status that came with them. And after the development of printing and then movable type, German abbot Johannes Trithemius exhorted his monks to continue to copy books by hand. He claimed that printing had a shorter life, he was wrong about that, and that the automated printing technique denied monks the discipline associated with hand scribing. And he worried too that the monks would have idle hands if printing became more fashionable. But this didn't last longer than a few decades, and in time, and by the late 15th century, the printing houses were working almost exclusively for monasteries, and monasteries themselves had established printing houses. And far from having taken away the works from the monks, it became obvious that the new tool made their work more efficient, and hence they could produce even more. Their jobs would change, and the value of their lives as workers could be made even more valuable. The works of Trithemius himself on a variety of topics would eventually be printed in many editions. This one abbot later became accused of a man who spread heresy, actually, believed in magic. And, you know, it actually occurred to me, I wonder if he believed in magic because he saw printing and saw the way his books would be copied, which must have seemed like magic at the time. Movable type made an unprecedented explosion. It made possible this unprecedented explosion in literary works. Michael Clampton's 3-volume work on the history of printing technology says that, I'm quoting here, a man born in 1453, the year of the fall of Constantinople, could look back from his 50th year on a lifetime in which about 8 million books had been printed, more perhaps than all the scribes of Europe had produced since Constantine founded his city in AD 336. Isn't that interesting? More than all that whole history in 50 years. Other experts suggest that Gutenberg's commercial innovations led to an increase of book production by a factor of 1,000. About 115 books were attributed to the early movable type printers. About 30,000 editions were attributed to the latter half of the 15th century, which is astonishing by standards of the time. But of course, a blip on the radar screen in our time. After all, if you look at Mises.org data and extrapolating backwards from where we have hard data, we can estimate some 100 million editions of articles and books have flown around the world since 1995. And keep in mind that this measures only the work of our servers and doesn't include the hundreds and thousands of servers around the world that host versions of our content. Since we are in Spain, I would like to say a few words about the printing entrepreneurs from this country in the 15th and 16th century. Their role in publishing history is rarely noted. These are the printers, the printing entrepreneurs. Lambert Palmart was the first printer in Spain. He worked from Valencia, the headquarters of commerce at the time. He printed some 15 books in his career, which was an incredible achievement. The first in 1475 in Saragossa. There was also Matthew of Flanders, lots of foreigners living in this lovely country, like me here today. Seville was the third city in line with the proliferation of printing in Spain, and here we have the work of Antonio Martinez, Alonso de Puerto, and Bartolomé Segura, all of whom printed throughout the 1480s. Tortosa was home to what became a vibrant and organized printing firm, which printed 28 books by 1500. Burgos was host to the firm of Frederick of Basel, who was in business with Michael Wenzler. I wonder if these names are the first time anybody has mentioned these names in several hundred years. I don't know. They made 35 books. Another addition to the list of Spanish printing heroes is Arnaldo Guen de Brocar, one of many so-called wandering printers who set up shop all over Spain. He, like others, printed mainly Bibles and theological works. And finally, our list would not be complete without the mention of John and Jacob Kronberger, obviously Germans, who set up shop in Seville with some partners and local workers, and eventually came to print some 239 books of theology, law, medicine, and music. And it was this firm that printed missionary tracts in Spanish to be sent to the New World, and Mexico in particular. They did even more than that. In 1539, they put together a full printing press outfit, and they sent it on a boat to Mexico. And this outfit printed 8 books in Mexico. This is the first printer to appear in the New World. So on behalf of the New World, I say thank you to Spain, not only for the economic thought that made free enterprise thrive in the Western Hemisphere, but also for the first printer to ever come to our shores. For anyone in love with free markets, the 16th and 17th century was a time to witness that wonderful beauty of ordered production, new capital combined with new skills to bring the world more of what it needed and wanted. The rush into the book market by printers of all shapes and sizes in all countries of Europe was a wonderful thing to behold. But there was a threat on the horizon called mercantilism, the theory that producers needed special protection. Part of the theory is that producers needed special protection from government in order to remain healthy in an atmosphere of extreme competitive pressure. Producers were beginning to discover then what every business knows today, that one aspect of free enterprise seems like a vast conspiracy to deny long-run profits to producers. The market process is always driving profits to zero as profitable companies are imitated by innovative upstarts using cheaper and more efficient methods. Society benefits from this process, but in order for an established firm to stay on top, it can never stop innovating, never stop striving for excellence. The answer to this reality in many trades was to seek government protection from competition abroad and to ask favors from the prince, to be the only favored producer, both as a guarantee that people would continue to be provided with goods and services they needed and as a guarantee for the producer against the distractions of competitive pressure from others. That's the theory and practice of mercantilism, a perfect recipe for hobbling progress. And just as the printers had driven the scribes out of business, the printers themselves were facing extreme competition by the 18th century, and they sought protection from more efficient upstarts, often called pirates, who were making life hard for this very profitable industry. These pirate firms were publishing older works and distributing them very cheaply and widely, while the dominant firms claimed that this practice was undermining their ability to fund new works and thus inhibiting innovation. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah. The established printers tapped into the mercantilist spirit, but with a special twist. They claimed that the words on the page constituted a special form of property. When they were copied by a firm other than the current publisher, they claimed, their property rights were being invaded. Their so-called intellectual property was being stolen. Now, on its face, this is a preposterous claim. Once ideas are known by others, they are inevitably and always copied. They cannot be owned in the conventional sense. Or another way of putting this is that ownership of ideas becomes multiplied without end. The only way to possess an idea as an exclusive property is to never share it with anyone. Once shared, the idea takes flight. What's more, the entire industry had been born, the whole industry of printing was born in the world of copying, not in making original work. Most famously, the most profitable text to publish was the Bible itself, and its most ancient transcriptions and translations. In fact, this had been the driving motivation of the invention of the press in the beginning, just as it had been the driving motivation of the scribes. And for this reason, it is crucial to understand the appearance of copyright as nothing other than an aspect of the mercantilist principle. The claims about intellectual property were nothing but a ruse offered by printers as a way of seeking legal protection from competition. Another example of the same was, of course, the patent. Both were rooted in this new idea of intellectual property, which had no precedent in the whole history of man. And on the continent, no one bought into this gibberish at all, seeing it for exactly what it was, a sop to producers that would have inhibited the whole engine of publishing from the ancient world to the present. What was called copyright did the opposite of the long-established goals of publishing. It raised costs, and it limited distribution, and it doomed works to a short life, given the uncertainties of the industry. This was a terrible direction to go, and in only one place in the world did it take hold, in England, which was undergoing a terrible religious struggle, and copyright became useful to the crown in order to suppress works incompatible with the official religion, whatever it happened to be at the time. And so, in the 18th century, there were endless fights in England over this matter of intellectual property. And meanwhile, on the continent, publishing remained competitive and free for 100 years after the first copyright statute was imposed on England. And even given England's laws, copyright statutes were largely ineffective at hobbling the market process into the late 19th century with the imposition of international copyright law. And laws have grown tighter and tighter throughout the 20th century until we have reached the point of absurdity since 1995 in the United States, with laws that pretty well doomed a half-century of scholarship to ruin. If you leave the state and protected industries in charge long enough, they will strangle progress to the point that civilization completely stagnates. And in the publishing industry, digital media couldn't have come along at a better time. It is saving what the state and the dominant publishing firms are trying to kill. The web and digital media are to the establishment what the printers were to the scribes, and the pamphleteers were to the established bookmakers. The web threatens what they believe to be the core of their existence right now, namely the restriction of what should be completely free, the imposition of scarcities on what should really enter into the domain of the non-scarce goods. Let's return now to the three principles that drive progress in publishing: low costs, wide distribution, permanent results. The web has actually achieved all three in the most spectacular way. The marginal costs of downloads is approaching zero. The access is approaching universal. The capacity for copying is infinite, and the results are everlasting. And as you know, the Mises Institute is furiously posting as many works from the whole of austro-liberal tradition as we possibly can, and we're working at a pace and with a discipline that compares with the older scribes. Our entire literature archive is completely open source, meaning that anyone in the world is free to simultaneously host our results, and these editions are like fire, and that there's no limit to them. A spark can create a roaring blaze, stretching hundreds of miles. This is the power of digital media, and it has achieved the dream of publishing innovation, every dream of publishing innovation from all of human history. When a new edition goes up on Mises.org, even before it is publicly linked, it is sent out through a torrent to servers worldwide, and immediately achieves immortality, even before it's publicly available on the site. It is archived on the site to be available for researchers and students all over the world. We have thousands of works available, and the number grows daily. Let me say a special note about Jesus Huerta de Soto. When we published our book with him, he considered it just a normal thing that we would, of course, also post the whole book online at the same time it was published in physical form. You see, he's a visionary. He understands what most American publishers doesn't understand. He told me just out here in the coffee, he said, you know, what we've found is that when we post the whole book for free online, we sell more copies, which is true. We found the same thing to be true. I don't know is there such a thing as entrepreneurial error? Yes. many US firms in publishing and European firms don't understand this yet. Huerta de Soto does understand this, but then he added, even if it weren't true, he would still make it available online, because that's, of course, the mission. The mission is to have your ideas copied. That's precisely the goal. That's not the threat. That's the goal. One of the works that have been copied for hundreds of years, both before and after the printing press, was the Etymologiae by 7th century Spanish Archbishop Saint Isidore of Seville. Right. The book had summarized all knowledge, all human knowledge. Imagine that. I'm going to write a book that summarizes all human knowledge. You know, that's what Saint Isidore did, and he did a pretty good job of it. Sometimes people talk about our friend St. Thomas as having been the first major Christian thinker to have rediscovered the ancients. It's not true. Isidore had many sections on Aristotle and all the ancient philosophers in his wonderful book. And even by the 15th century, this book had still achieved great notoriety. Can you imagine? And many of the Spanish printers of the 15th and 16th centuries busily printed Isidore's works. He was not only a brilliant intellectual, Saint Isidore had a passion for two great tasks: the preservation of knowledge through writing and the distribution of knowledge through copying and widest possible distribution. And it is for this reason that Saint Isidore was named the patron saint of the internet. That's why. That happened in the late 1990s, I think. I think, too, of Mises himself, who labored for 6 years between 1934 and 1940 to write Human Action, only to have it published in German in Geneva and have it vanish down a memory hole in the midst of a ghastly war and global upheaval. He was transported to the United States, where he started all over again with an English translation that was published in 1949. After much internal debate at Yale University Press, it almost wasn't published. It barely got published. They expected low sales. After we became conscious of the power of the web, in the 1990s, Human Action was our first giant project, first in HTML, then we had it for handheld computers. We had every kind of format, PDF. Most recently, we put it up again in EPUB format, so it's a universal digital reader format. And there was already a audio version of Human Action that you could buy, and the Mises Institute tried to get rights to this audio version, but we failed. The company that held it under its wonderful copyright restrictions refused to let us have it. So we commissioned a new reading ourselves, which of course we give away to the world and also sell. That's brand new. It just happened within the last several weeks. The whole of Human Action now in audio. 70 years ago, this work had a very unpromising start. But now, Human Action, Mises' book, is immortal. May we someday say the same of human liberty itself. With Mises.org and its supporters around the world, I do think that this day will someday arrive. Thank you very much.